One-party rule, 1 year. As I sat and talked to the border agents, they told me of the border cities that had to close their schools because of the cartels coming through and shooting. Of the ranchers who are having their houses burned or their grandchildren kidnapped. Then they said something so shocking, I had to ask them twice. You see, I heard the vice president say, this is just Central America problem. I said, is that really what's happening? No, they told me people were coming from 160 countries. They said they just caught people on the terrorist watch list. I came down. We did a press conference. In the press conference, I mentioned that we had caught people on the terrorist watch list from Yemen. You remember the USS Cole? The American Navy ship that was bombed? Or maybe you need to refresh the memory of real recently. You know a U.S. embassy that was overtaken? No, I'm not talking back in Iran in '79. I'm talking about the comparison to today. As that I said that to the American public. I respect all of you. You come here because you want to legislate. I expect you would be shocked too. That you'd probably call me up. What can we do? You want to protect your constituents? I know you do. But Mr. Speaker, there was a member of the Democratic Party on the Intel Committee, tweeted, said I was lying. Said he gets the same intel as I do because I'm on the Gang of Eight. Interesting, when I put the facts out, I don't know, maybe the mail's slow. I've never once heard him apologize. Or worse yet, I've never once heard him say, how can we stop it? How can we stop it? I didn't even see an amendment added to this bill. Think about that for one moment for the American public. You are spending more money than we spent to end World War II. You're hiring 87,000 IRS agents. Not one Border Patrol agent. Not one new dollar. You're providing money for amnesty. You're providing money, $450,000, for people who came here illegally. And you're taking it from American hardworking taxpayers. But you do nothing to stop those on the terrorist watch list from coming across this border. Nothing. There has been nearly 1.7 illegal border encounters at the southern border since President Joe Biden became president. And our border czar, Vice President Kamala Harris, still has no plan to support our border patrol. Now let's put this in perspective. There has been more illegal border crossing between the months of February and October under Joe Biden than in 2018, 2019, and 2020 combined. So when somebody asks me, what does it mean if you have one-party rule for 1 year? You get more illegal crossings simply from February to October than you did in 2018, 2019, and 2020, all combined. What do you think's going to happen after the billions of dollars you spend in this bill providing amnesty? That number will look small to you. But I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, some people say, let's wait and see what the CBO says. So when the CBO comes back and tells you, you got millions more, it's okay, we'll still vote. Let that sink in. What's the Biden administration reaction? They're now considering paying illegal immigrants $450,000 per family. An action that President Biden admits would incentivize more people to come over illegally. Mr. Speaker, when we tell our children's children about this night, we'll tell them that's where their future went. When they ask us why do they pay such high taxes, we'll remind them about this night. Because we built up our bureaucracy. Mr. Speaker, you're actually celebrating this bill. You're actually celebrating this bill. That's more than some of the 9/11 victims received. Can you think about that? How do you explain, Mr. Speaker, as my friend Steny Hoyer said so proudly, mentioned today for our children's children, how do we explain that those that were killed on that fateful day of 9/11 received less than those who came across illegal? It's okay, I'll be here a long time.
House will be in order.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry if it...
Gentlemen will suspend. Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I've got to apologize to you. I think I'm upsetting people on the other side of the aisle when I tell them what's in the bill. They just yelled at me that they're leaving. I apologize. Mr. Speaker, nobody on this side of the aisle wrote this bill. I thought that was going to be different, Mr. Speaker, because I took President Biden at his word. I took him at his word when he said he was going to get COVID under control. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, more Americans have died this year than last year under COVID. Mr. Speaker, the $450,000, that's more than some of the 9/11 victims received. It's more than the next of kin receives in insurance of those 13 Gold Star families that got killed by a suicide bomber who was in the prison of Bagram. Mr. Speaker, I watched in disbelief as President Biden said he'd do nothing different. I watched in disbelief, Mr. Speaker, when he had a press conference and he told Americans it was safe to come to the airport. In less than 30 minutes, you were on that conference call too, Mr. Speaker, with the Secretary of State, Joint Chiefs said no, it wasn't safe to come to the airport. Mr. Speaker, there are many people that have served this nation, served in the armed services, and on both sides of this aisle. I have never watched members work so hard to get the American hostages out of Afghanistan to only be shut down by our own State Department. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you of a personal story. Mr. Speaker, I picked up the phone one morning when this first started, and I called the regular number to the White House. And I said, I'd like to talk to the President about what's happening in Afghanistan. White House recently called, wanted to know if it was really me. To the President's credit, he called me back. I said, Mr. President, I know you're trying to hold this deadline for the Taliban, but what about our allies? What about those from the UK and France who fought side by side, not because their country was attacked, but because we were attacked? He told me he wasn't going to budge. I said, Mr. President, there are thousands of Americans that are held there that can't get out. He said, Kevin, no, the number's much smaller. I said, Mr. President, what is the number then? Oh, it's just smaller. I've watched the President look America in the eye and tell us he would not leave till every American's out. What do you say to those Americans that are still stuck there? The last time we felt like this, Jimmy Carter was president. Mr. Speaker, what does it say to those Gold Star families? Mr. Speaker, I had one in my office, a father who had his daughter, who wasn't even supposed to be there but volunteered. She was an electrician. Just days before, you see photos of her holding a young child. She told her sister, I'm going out in front of the wall because you can't believe it. Someone needs to be there for them. She wasn't supposed to be out in front of that wall. When that suicide bomber that was locked up in Bagram, that never should have got out, that we never should have shut down, killed 13 of the finest Americans we know. You know what this bill does? Nothing for them. It gives more money to an illegal person who crossed this border. I'm sorry. Americans expect more. Our priorities should be different. These people risk their life every day for us. Just let that sink in to your children's children. One-party rule for 1 year has brought us inflation we haven't seen in 31 years. Gas prices the highest it's been since the last time President Biden was down at the White House. A Thanksgiving that's going to cost you more at any time in your life. A border where 1.7 million encounters. A border between February and October that more people have crossed than 2018, 2019, and 2020 combined. And Mr. Speaker, the closest the president has ever been to the border in 42 years is to drive through El Paso. Mr. Speaker, a vice president who is the czar of the border. This isn't a Republican or Democrat issue. This is the safety of this nation. What do you think's going to happen to that border when you provide $1 billion in amnesty? What do you think's going to happen when you reward people with $450,000? Where do you get the money? From the hardworking taxpayers of America who have less to give. But you know what? They're going to have to give more because you're hiring 87,000 IRS agents to come after them. 1.2 million more audits. And half of all those 1.2 are going after Americans who make $75,000 or less. That's what you base this entire bill on. That's what you waited for the CBO to tell you. How much money can we get from them? How is that possible? The payments for illegal immigrants is just the latest data point in a much larger trend of failures on this border. Cheered on by left-wing activists, President Biden and Vice President Harris have presided over the greatest series of border security blunders in American history. Mr. Speaker, if 160 different countries have had people come across that border illegally,